Hello and welcome to GM Tips. This is part 2 of me trying to do this right. I've been thinking on this one a while, and since I've gotten my new book, and I want to share a little bit about it because I've gotten 2 books that I really like and added to my collection. This, number 1, very excited. Reminds me a lot of the D&D Heroes of Horror from 3.5, and this. Now, why am I going to talk on the topic of horror? Because I think there's some interesting aspects, and I think first in looking at what horror is, I think first thing let's address is how can horror enhance a campaign. And I think the first thing we got to address is the challenge of, well, undead and a lot of other horrific creatures are already part of our game systems. Let's think about it. I mean, let's look at D&D as a whole, Dungeons and Dragons. You've got the Mind Flayers, the Illithids, and what they do. You have the Neo-Sagothi, or the Sagothies. You have, or Neolithids. You have the Beholders, the Eye Tyrants. You have a lot of the different fungoid type of creatures that are in the Underdark. You have the Drow and their amazingly nasty, just sadistic rituals. And D&D with Loth and with a lot of other ones. Geez, there's a lot of patronesses, but Noctula is kind of the goddess or the demoness in Pathfinder. So you've got a lot of that already built in there. So now, okay, so what are the players really afraid of? And I think part of that, you got to look at it. Today, we've got so many horror movies and horror genre things out that very few things put the fear into us anymore. I remember when Wishmaster, and that's one of the movies that I watched again recently, scared the living crap out of me as a teenager. I mean, it was some scary stuff with Clive. He did some really horrific things with the djinn. And, it's not that way today. That stuff today, people just kind of laugh it off and go, okay, that's just funny. I mean, it's kind of scary, but, not really. And even a lot of the Cthulhu stuff, it's like Cthulhu for president and this and that. And we're not even frightened by those aspects anymore. When yet there's some of the most horrific things you can think of. We've mainstreamed the horror so much that the idea of putting it into our campaigns, like, okay, yeah, whatever. So the first thing you got to address is that, look, horror can have some real impact on a campaign. And uncertainty. So you hear mini GM kind of running around. I'm sorry. You're always going to hear in my podcast, or my cast, YouTube cast, not podcasts. Some days I'm so random with my scripting because I do go from here. And you guys got to understand that. I don't write it down. I don't script it. I just don't. So, first thing you got to address and deal with is why horror? I mean, it's such a beaten genre, and so many people are so used to all these Blair Witch type of recreations and everything else. So why and how is it going to make my campaign better? Well, I'll give you a perfect example, and this is a spoiler for some of those who are playing my Reign of Winter campaign. And for those who want to play Reign of Winter, and for those who are going to GM it, this is a spoiler. I'm giving it to you as clear as day. You don't want to watch this part, then fast forward through the next 4 minutes, okay? The players have gone to a realm called Iobaria. Iobaria is a realm that is part of the Inner Sea realm. Now, you can make it whatever you want in your campaign. If you're playing Faerun, pick an empire that best kind of resembles Iobaria, all right? Or put Iobaria into your world. Put it somewhere on one of the tips towards the poles, the northern pole, that you normally wouldn't expect. You can move it into a lot of different campaigns, but this is the Inner Sea Golarian campaign that it's coming from. Iobaria has a very long history, and a lot of people don't weed back into that history. Iobaria was not always Iobaria. It became Iobaria in about 720 when Iobar, one of the barbarians from the Ulfin, came over and claimed the realm for his own. So it started out that originally this whole area of what is Iobaria today was the Cyclopean Empire of Kalaran. It was a colony. It was a Cyclopean colony that came into being because of the fall of the Cyclopean Empire at Golgon. So keep that in mind. There's some things already there that are kind of stirring, and we'll go in a little more. Now, to give you an idea how old the world is, we're talking about negative 7,000 AR is the last start of recorded time when the old civilizations were around. The current world time is in 47 something, depending on the year you want to play in. So 11,000 years old or more, probably older than that, but that's just recorded history. So you have several civilizations that were around in the beginnings. You had the Cyclopean Empire, which rose up, and they were a very oracle-driven, spiritualistic society. In the beginning, very good mostly, too. You had the Aslanti. They were more lawful. They were the humans. They were lawful, neutral most cases, sometimes good, sometimes very evil, but very lawful in most things they did. You had the Aboleths. The Aboleths were around in the seas. And they had a group of them that became the Veil Masters, which tried to control their human civilization of the Aslan. And they do it from behind the scenes control. So you had that. And you had other civilizations. The elves were around from Castrovel that came. You had the dwarves in the Underdark, the orcs. There were many civilizations that were around in the beginning. Well, what happened over time is that the Cyclopean Empire rose to a pinnacle that rivaled the Aslanti in technology, knowledge, and arts. And they got into the pursuit of very dark arts. So they got into the dark veiled gods, the Cthulhu gods. And they got into demon worship and other things. So they had a lot of chaos that came into their realms and bloodlust and destruction. And they destroyed a lot of their empires. One of the empires, Golgon, fell. It was the greatest of the Cyclopean empires. Some refugees went to Ibdalos. There was already a colony there with the humans and the Cyclopses that worked really well. Well, another group was exiled by that group up to what is today Iobaria, and that became the Calaran Empire. They were hoping to get away from their savage ways, but it never happened. And so there was a lot of dark things and cannibalism and other things that went on in Iobaria before it was Iobaria. So that gives you a setting of just the miasma that's there. And I truly believe, as a fantasy GM, that if you practice enough negativity in an area, that area literally soaks it in. From the spirits that run around that aren't settled and rested to the very core of what just leaks in there from other places. It's like you open a portal to the wrong realm. Remember when they opened the portal to Cthulhu's realm, what happened? People went nuts. And that's kind of what happened up there. And so it sets the whole area ripe in my campaign to introduce it. So that leads to the next thing. If you're going to introduce horror, have a backstory that leads into it. Players are not just going to go with it because you say, hey, I think we should be doing a horror campaign. Or, hey, how about you guys, we do a horror campaign? You have to be creative in bringing in the why. And there's enough cruelty in any world, believe me. Whether it's Faerun, where the gods like Bane and what were all the ones? I used to remember them all off my head. Nerul, Jerkul, and Jerkul, I think, was another, or Jerul was another one, the god of the dead. Orcus. There's a lot of warpness that goes on, and it poisons an area. And when it does, that area literally becomes just pervasively nutty. And it sets the whole thing for the sanity factors of horror, as well as the taints and everything else. What happens when you explore enough of the negativity, even if it's for a good cause? It taints you. Perfect example of that, if you guys have ever watched the TV show Fringe, Fringe is greatness. I really do like it. I think they could have done some things better, but it gives you the idea of what happens. And you see the Walter that's on there. There's Walter, the good guy, and what do they call them? The Waposter or the evil Walter. And he has a special name for him, and I should remember it. I watched the episode in the 4th season last night. But the whole pervasiveness, and they had an episode, I think, last night that really set the tone of why a horror works. There was this doctor that was a profiler. In one world, he was good because of the woman who was a part of his life. She left such an indelible thing on him at age 10 that changed his life from the horrors his dad inflicted on him as a farmer. And then there was the other one that didn't have that in the other world. And he was doing some just brutal serial killer things. So they brought the other one over to help. And he tried to help the other one, and he did. When the other one stole his very experience of the woman, he realized how wrong his life was, and how bad and how tainted. And he felt horrible from removing this woman and this experience from his other alter's life. And you think, oh my gosh, this guy's going to go evil now. Nope. Her experiences, even though she was removed from his life, were so indelibilized onto him. And that's, thinking of that, the taint of the one who did not have that woman in his life was so tainted. He was so just cold and calculated and nasty. And that's the taint that comes in and just destroys you from within. So if you want some ideas on those kind of things, watching Fringe is just beautiful for some of the stuff that they do, and just the evil, the pervasive evil, and how they use technology for the evil. So you have to set the setting to allow for there to be a reason why there's horror in the first place in that realm. In this case, I'm going to allow the fact that there was dark influences. And how did it affect my players, and how did I start introducing horror? Even before I had this guide, the horror adventures, which, by the way, is really good. And I'm going to open it to the pages to show you what's in here, because I think you'll be interested once you see some of the stuff they have contained in. So, starting up here, Chapter 1 is horror characters. So they go into a little bit of the whys. Hang on here. Let's move over. So they go through a lot of things from corruption, sanity, and fear. And then they go into the archetypes, of course. And they've got some really cool things, even a serial killer under the vigilantes, to the horror rules. And I think you have curses, horrific diseases, environments, flesh warping, haunts, and madness. So it's pervasively in there, and I think you want to have it. I really do, because it's adaptable to either any of the systems that are D20, even to GURPS probably if you wanted to. But it adds enough in there that really flavors it for how it affects your players. Now, I had a player that died in Iobaria. He died at the hands of some giants there. That, he went into his combat. The player wasn't there. We played him as if the player would have played him, and he died. And whether it was him or someone else, this was going to happen. When the death happened there, you're in a land that has been so tainted by an ancient empire that when you come back, you just aren't right in the head for a while. And the reason is because when you die, your spirit departs, and you see the spirit realm around you and where you are. And he saw the horror of Iobaria at its bare bones level. Beyond the humans, beyond the settlements, the true horrors. So when they pulled him back, it had been some time since he had died. He didn't come back right. He came back a little paranoid and a little bit edgy. And that's how it all begins. It kind of begins with shaking your character, and you heal, but you're never quite right again. It's true in life. Now, some people say, well, how would you do that to a hero? They're heroes, for heaven's sakes. It's a fantasy realm. Don't mess with your players. Don't, this is supposed to be positive for them. Don't make it so nasty or negative. We'll address that at the end of the video, because I did in the last one. I think it's worth talking. So I'll leave it to the end, so if you guys don't want to watch it, you can cut it off. But I'll address that a little bit. But that's one way you can introduce it, and that's how I did. Now, they're sitting outside an ancient ruin of Darothrost. Wasn't part of the thing, didn't railroad them into it. They chose to go here because they saw some great potential of this being a ruin with possible magic. Why not? Help us in our quest and our crusade. Easy to justify. Easy allows them to go off the rails for a little while. And when they came up to this city, I gave them such a description that it's just chilling. Here's a city that's sitting there. It's slowly being reclaimed by the terrain. Now, it's, of course, very slow because you're in a northern kind of icy realm. It has summers. They get up into the 50s, 60s. but never really hot. So the reclamation is slow. But it was a thriving town. It was a town that was taken by a plague called the Devezda Plague, Devezda March Plague. And it's often the brunt of jokes, this city, because of the horrors that went on in Darethrost. Bad things come out of Darethrost. Players don't know that, but bad things come out of Darethrost. There's a whole history of plague, righteous indignation, murder, then settling, then the other group getting the plague, more vigilantism, more murder, bodies piling up at the bottom of this, what was once a bridge. When this started out back in the kingdoms, this bridge existed back before Earthfall, and that was back in negative, let's see, Earthfall was negative 5293 AR. Sorry, I have to consult my notes a little. So, 9,000 years prior, this bridge was here, or more. And these towers, that's how long they've lasted. And the city grew up around them. When they first were settled by the Ulfin and they came over into this area, this became a trade hub that allowed them to do trade with Casmaron over the sea bridge, that the land bridge that went over to the Casmaron continent. So this became a major trade post where people would stop. It had a granary, had some beer making things, had shops. It wasn't huge, a couple thousand, a small city to large city. And now it's gone. And only the husks of the buildings remain. And Darethrost is still there. The bridge, however, is missing a mile of the span over the crevasse. There's a huge crevasse that's 3 miles down. And some nasty, nasty environment through there. What the origins and purpose of this place is, the players don't know. I know. I wrote them up. It's one thing I love about Paizo, and I'll say this about the materials. Even though they write up a lot and they give you a lot, they leave a lot of room for you to be creative. That's why I recommend the system. They didn't tell me how Darethrost all came about. They just gave me enough background for me to write around it, and I loved it. And so I've written up Darethrost, and they're going to go into it, but they're going to be challenged with sanity. They're going to be challenged with taint and other things. It's part of the realm. And could it destroy them? Sure. Could it TPK them? Sure. It's part of life. And again, no GM, and I don't recommend any GM doing a TPK, but let's face it, rolls happen and players die, and it's part of the whole story. And if you fear that as a GM, then go to these other systems that are non-dice based and let you be whatever you want to be. You do whatever you want to do. As long as you can justify it, you get to do it. Sorry, I don't buy into these systems. I like them. They're creative. But they allow the players to have total sway. And it just takes the element of heroism out of it. If a player can do anything, so what? It's just a different story every time. Same thing. Some of you don't like that. I love the idea of critical fails, critical successes, and everything else because it makes such a great, rich story that you miss out when you don't have that. But that's part of D&D and some of the others. They made it a little more simplified, and that's fine. You like it, stay with it. For me, it takes creativity out of it, and I don't like it. I like creativity. And I like things that have challenges to them. And if the party goes, well, then it's a great story of it going, But it's part of life. And don't fear it as a GM. You're not trying to kill players, but if it happens, it happens. Then you write a great story around it. So the party's going to be facing this. Now, what are they going to face? They're going to face a lot of things. And one of the things that they are going to face in here, and this has a great section, it's why I say In Search of Sanity. This one here is an adventure written around the Cthulhu mythos. And they are alive and real behind the dark veil in the inner sea. And as you can see, and hopefully I can get the shine off of this, there are many, there we go, gods that are given in this first adventure. And it's all the mythos. They took it and fleshed it out. And again, you gotta love when Paizo goes through and do their things. And this is Wes Snyder, by the way, Wes. I give you a lot of props on this with your team of writing all this up. He goes into depth with all these different gods that they didn't have before. They had some of them in the inner sea, but they didn't give you the whole mythos. Now you have it. And so you can use this in Iobaria or whatever realm you want. This is a justifier of sanity and madness and taint and everything else. It's a big justifier of it. And they have whole sections in here on it where they have tables that you can roll for. And I love it. They have the aspects of horror. Really take time, if you don't, to stop this video and read this. I'll leave it up there for a while. But they go into a more into depth in here and why. And then they've got sanity damage. And what does it do? They have insanity and factors and the rolling for it. They have corruption. They have accursedness. They have being a deep one, or a ghoul, or a hellbound, or a lich, or lycanthropy, or possession, shadowbound, vampirism. They have all these, plus the race rules and how are they affected by these things. And they go through all of it, and I love that. They have feats that are set around all of it, and it'll help you to play it out. So this is why I say have this kind of book. They have the domains of evil. They have horrific traps and nightmares and other things you can deal with. And you know, flesh warping. They have the aspects of early flesh warping and how does it affect the player when they flesh warp. Again, it gives you a lot of different things that you can work with. So keep this in mind as you're working with it. Now, this said, how does a horror aspect like this enrich the campaign? It adds a lot of dimension to it that you don't have with other ones. Here's the type of the dimensions that you have to deal with. You have the dimensions of sanity. Sanity is always a tenuous thing, and sometimes character sanity is a fun thing. I love it sometimes when they go random in what they can do. Hang on real quick, I gotta switch out of seat. But sanities are such deep waters, and you can have so much fun with it. And insanity can be cured. Some insanity has lingering effects. And that's what I love about this, is that even if your player heals, there's always going to be a nagging doubt or something that's always sit in them. Why is this fun? Because for a GM, it allows you to challenge them as a hero in new dimensions. You can play upon this, not as a major disadvantage, but just something that will affect their decision making and give them a little hesitation. Maybe it causes them to be a little more thoughtful. Maybe it causes them to research more. Maybe it causes them to do other things. But sanity is such a fun thing. And it can change an alignment. It can change a character's worship of a deity. It can change the whole dimension of a game. And that's why introducing it can be such fun, but always have some places of where it can go to. Because you don't want to go in unprepared. You really want to study it out a little bit, like I'm doing, and be prepared for when those situations come. But it can really introduce a new dimension to your playing. So why taints? Well, let's face it. Let's look at, say you want to get into the flesh warping and you find some things about flesh warping. You want to flesh warp yourself to make yourself more powerful. Well, what does that do to affect your mind and your ethics and everything else? It begins to taint things. You're reaching, how should we say, how many people in our history of our world have reached towards evil ways of accomplishing things to try to do it for the greater good? And what does it do to them? Same thing in a fantasy game. It can give justification behind your baddies, can enrich it and give another depth to them that they normally don't have. And it will do the same to your players as they try to combat it and use similar methods. One may think, well, I'll become a werewolf to fight the weres. It'll give me even ground. Okay, but what does it do to your sanity? Knowing that you're engorging on the flesh of human beings that you're trying to protect. And then how does that hunger drive you to places that you don't want to go? I love Being Human. Great series if you haven't seen it. It really explores a lot of the dilemmas of being these type of creatures and what does it play upon the psyche. And this is the kind of thing that you can introduce into your campaign for new depth and dimension when you do these things. You're not doing this as just a one-trick pony. You really are trying to create a depth here. Now, the other thing that's in there, of course, the accursedness. So you're accursed. Maybe you were cursed by a witch, or cursed by a hag, or cursed by something else. How does it then affect your hero? And what does it do, again, to the psyche of them? Corruption. So, fear. What does fear do? How does it create hesitancy? Let's face it, for this first time you see a Cthulhu type of creature, it's not like every other creature on a world. And it begins to mess with the mind, especially when you see it feeding upon other human beings and doing its evil worst. It begins to work with the sanity. And it begins to just mess with the sanity. And I think if you leave that out as a GM and just let your players just roll with it, okay, it's another monster, who cares, it's a nasty one, you take away that whole edge. Let's face it, heroes do see monsters. They see orcs, trolls, giants, but what about a flesh-warped giant? What about an undead giant? What about a lich who's got a bent to go a certain direction with society and his minions? What about the one that's collecting dead, hanging them up like cordwood, and then doing things with them? See, we had an adventure I played in one time when I was a rogue, and it says, your bodies are stacked out here by this house like cordwood. It affected my rogue. My rogue was never the same, because he had seen death, he had seen murder, but he had never seen such a wanton, just disregard for life and the dead body of those who had died. It just messed with his psyche, and he was never the same. He was more somber. Yes, he still joked and he had an edge, but his edge got darker because he saw some things he shouldn't have seen that affected him. Allow your players to get into this. Players, as you're embracing this type of thing, this is the thing that can make your character go over the top. I mean, honestly, the quirks, the tics, the little things that affect them, that's real role play. You want to get into role play. That's role play with a capital R. I mean, ask Jared Leto in the latest one with the Suicide Squad the depths he went to become the Joker and how it affected him. And it did. It profoundly affected him and his performance. And that's why he was so much darker than some of the other ones you see. And again, this is the type of thing that affects the characters. And it can take a hero and add a new depth of obstacles for your hero, which goes back to kind of Evil Squeegee's thing, which he mentioned about, the overlying story or purpose, and then the obstacles. These are the obstacles you throw in the path of the party. It's their own self-made obstacles in some cases, and that's okay. That's the fun of it. And again, for those DMs that say, and I'm going to address this, and this is the very end. So these are the things. So horror, great thing to add in. You do need these two books in my mind in order to do it right and to really add the right kind of dimension and depth and effect to what it does to the players. I think well worth the money spent. And how to incorporate them if you need more help, rickmoh, RICMOH 43 at yahoo.com. Now, if you want to end here, end here. 2-minute speech to GMs and fellow DMs. There's a bunch of you that believe that the party should never die. There should never be a TPK. There should never be character deaths. The dice roll should not affect and should not limit a player to how they can play and become the epic hero. That dice rolls should be left out. I'm going to challenge your mind for a minute. If you're writing a story and all you get is to allow the player to write it exactly the way they want, yes, you throw in obstacles and things to make them think. But all you do at the end is let them write their story completely as they want to write it, in a sense. What challenge is there? What fun? What mirth? Yes, there's some people that do quite well with it. For me, a critical fail or a critical hit are tremendous. It's a chance to let the players truly take the reins and say what they did wrong and how badly it went or how powerful it went. And see, those moments, that way the whole game is not a bunch of pontificating and just going whatever direction you want and write the story whatever way. Yes, we got to let the characters have a response, the players have a response, and then they're going to act on the obstacle and come up with their own spin on it, and that's going to affect how the story goes. Roles are part of that. Even in life, not every blow hits hard. Not every blow goes well. Maybe your opponent on a fumble, way like a critical fumble, is your opponent. It's not always you just oopsed up. It's you went in, you weren't thinking, maybe you were up in the heat of battle or the rage of the moment, and the opponent outthought you and did it in such a way that you look like your pants are down around your ankles. And that's what happens. It does. And that's a critical fail to me. It doesn't mean that, oh, you're just a klutz. Yeah, there's moments of that, but it's not always that way. Sometimes I really write it for them and say, hey, you went in for that sword lunge. You thought you had them, but they were twice as fast in anticipating you and swung around and you fell on your face. Or you fell in such a way that you stabbed yourself with your sword, not thinking, or it splintered off and a piece went up into you. There's ways you can take a fumble and make it very realistic into the story and not make it horrific. And it follows a movie cinema type of thing of a hero trying to do the right thing. Let's look at The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Perfect job there. How many times did he whoops up, but yet somehow still it came out in his favor? It happens. Not everybody is the most adept hero all the time. Critical hits. That's the moment when that player digs down deep and has that moment of insight and just waylays the opponent in a way it didn't anticipate. That's a critical. Why are they so hated? Because the dice controls the outcome of a game? That's the fun of it. Why not? I don't always want my hero to succeed every single time. And I'm saying this when playing as a player. If you can't handle that your hero is going to have moments where they just F it up royal, then why are you playing the game? What fun is it to always get your way? You know, and that's the way I kind of look at it, guys. I really do. And it's a serious thought to you guys. I mean, I'm not asking you to adopt my way of thinking, but give it a little thought in it for a little bit and really think on that. Dice rolls are amazing. Even a hit sometimes goes critical and you do all ones on your damage. Maybe its armor still deflected a great amount of that blow. It happens. But to just discount it and throw it away, and in the same way of saying, well, I'm not going to put this in here because the players are not going to like it. They're just going to balk at it. You know, they're not going to want to do it. They're going to mess it up. This is where you have to sit down with them and educate them to the greatness of these type of things. You got to get them on board with you. My players, I do that by just introducing things slowly in there and making it fun. And the players love it. They do. Even the ones that are at the brunt end of it go, this could be kind of fun, you know. Because I don't make it as this just tragic moment. I don't laugh at them. I don't make fun of them. It's a moment for them to dig themselves out of a hole that they had never thought themselves to be in. A whole new dimension. A whole new set of fun. Keep that in mind. Even in the best of campaigns, people are like, I want to just finish this. I want to just finish this. Well, sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes no matter how hard you try, there's several TPKs. And I do dig them out from sometimes with deidal help and some interceding things and some kind of fantastical things that go on. But I'm not going to do it every time. It's not my job. Fate happens. And when it does, it does. And sometimes heroes don't make it to the end of their life. They just don't. And it's how true heroic stories are written, you know, and I always loved that aspect of them. There was always that level of vulnerability that was still there. Even though they were fantastic, there was still a vulnerability there. So keep that in mind. That's enough of my pontificating on this. I hope you enjoy this episode. It took me 2 takes to do, but I really wanted to do this right. And I really wanted to make it worth your time to sit through. And I hope you have a tremendous week of horror and fantasy and fun this week as you go after the horror and the adventure of it.